My car was gone, just gone. I stood on the curb in my scrubs at 6 in the morning, keys still in my hand, staring at the empty spot where I'd parked it the night before, and for a second, I actually thought I was losing my mind. Before I tell you what happened next, if you've ever had a neighbor who thought a rule book mattered more than a person, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me down in the comments what you would have done in my shoes. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Carol, and I've worked nights in the cardiac unit at Riverside Memorial Hospital for almost 11 years. I've held the hands of more frightened people than I can count. In the middle of the night, when the monitors start beeping too fast and everyone's scared, including me sometimes. It's not an easy job, and it's not a job that lets you keep a normal schedule. I come home at strange hours, sometimes still in my scribs, sometimes with circles under my eyes so deep I look like I've been crying, even when I haven't. I'd lived on Maple Court for 6 years by then. Quiet street, friendly enough neighbors, nothing dramatic ever really happened there. That month, my driveway was being repaved, so I parked my car on the street, right in front of my own house, with a city permit sitting on the dashboard where anybody could see it if they bothered to look. Denise didn't look. Denise was the head of our little homeowners association, and to her, a car parked overnight on the street meant one thing and one thing only: a violation of Rule 14, no overnight parking without HOA approval. She wasn't a cruel woman, I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to make her the villain here, but she wasn't. She was just someone who had spent so many years following rules to the letter that she'd forgotten to ask whether the rules still made sense in front of her. So she called a tow truck, herself. No warning, no knock on my door. She had my car hauled away while I was upstairs asleep after a 16-hour shift, getting maybe 4 hours of rest before I had to be back at the hospital. When I walked outside that morning and saw the empty curb, my stomach just dropped straight through the floor. I had 90 minutes before my shift started. No car, no backup plan. I called my supervisor, apologized, and told her I'd find a way in somehow. Then I took 2 buses and walked 11 blocks in the cold, and I got there 14 minutes late, freezing, exhausted, and closer to tears than I want to admit.
What I didn't know that morning was that 3 miles away, in the waiting room of my own hospital, a man named Frank was sitting with his hands folded so tight his knuckles had turned white. His mother, Eleanor, had been rushed in overnight with a heart episode. Frank hadn't slept either. He kept replaying an ordinary phone call he'd had with her the week before, nothing important, and thinking about how he hadn't said "I love you" before hanging up, because he never imagined he'd need to. Eleanor was brought up to my unit, and she became my patient. I didn't know who her son was. She didn't know who I was either. Not really, not at first. To me, she was just an 81-year-old woman who was terrified and trying so hard not to show it. I held her hand through the roughest part of that night, when her heart rate topped low enough that 2 doctors came running into the room. I stayed 20 minutes past the end of my shift, unpaid, because I didn't want her to wake up alone. In the morning, Frank walked in and found his mother stable, breathing steady, color back in her face. Eleanor grabbed his hand before he'd even sat down and said, "That nurse, the one with the tired eyes, she stayed with me. She held my hand when I thought I wasn't going to make it through the night." Frank thanked me before he even asked my name, and then he looked at me a little closer and asked if I was all right, because I think the exhaustion on my face went beyond just one hard shift. I brushed it off at first, the way I always do, but he asked again, gently, and I ended up telling him, almost laughing at how ridiculous it sounded out loud, that my own HOA had towed my car that morning, and I'd taken 2 buses just to make it in on time to care for his mother. Frank got very still. He asked which HOA. I told him, Maple Court. Frank was the president of that HOA. He didn't say a word about it to me right then. He just thanked me again, sat with his mother a while longer, and left carrying something heavy that I couldn't see yet. Now, here's where this could have gone the easy way you've seen 100 times. Frank could have marched into a meeting, exposed Denise in front of everyone, and let her get humiliated while the neighborhood clapped. But Frank knew Denise. She'd brought soup to his house the week his father passed away. She'd organized the whole block to help a family who lost everything in a house fire. She wasn't a villain, she was just wrong, and Frank understood the difference. So instead, he called an emergency HOA meeting and asked one simple question. Had anyone actually checked the parking permits before ordering that tow? Denise, confident as always, said the rule was the rule, permit or not, and that exceptions couldn't be made every time somebody had a special circumstance. She still didn't know whose car she'd had towed. That's when Frank told her it was mine, the nurse who had just spent the night saving his mother's life. The room went completely silent. I heard about it secondhand, but people said Denise's face just changed, slowly, like the certainty was draining right out of her. She hadn't asked, she hadn't looked, she'd let a rule matter more than a person, and now she had to sit with that. She didn't apologize right away. I found out later she went home that night and sat alone in her kitchen for a long time, replaying the whole morning, thinking about how fast she'd acted without checking anything at all. The next afternoon, she showed up at my door with an envelope of cash to cover the towing fees and a small card that just said, "I was wrong and I'm sorry, truly." I'm not the type to hold a grudge, so I invited her in for coffee instead of shutting the door, and we ended up talking for almost an hour, mostly about her late husband, who used to work night shifts himself years ago. The HOA changed its towing policy not long after that, requiring a full 48-hour written notice before any car could be removed. No exceptions. But honestly, the real change wasn't the policy, it was Denise. She started knocking on doors and asking questions before assuming the worst about her own neighbors. As for Eleanor, she made a full recovery, slow and steady, and she never forgot that night. Every few months, she still shows up at the hospital with a little tin of homemade oatmeal cookies just for me, and we sit together during my break talking about nothing important, the way people do when they've quietly decided someone matters to them. I never got anything grand out of any of it. No lawsuit, no big payout, no dramatic ending with everyone cheering. What I got was quieter than that, a real friendship with a woman I once cared for as a total stranger, and a street that finally learned the difference between enforcing a rule and understanding the person standing in front of you. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments, and stay close because I've got plenty more stories like this one still to share.